All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College EWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been creating a series of video presentations that are based off of the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. So far I've gone through, in the Complete Beginner Start here, I went through the Getting Started with the Web. I went through, under the HTML, I went through the whole section, the Introduction to HTML, the Multimedia and Embedding, the HTML tables. I went through the entire Styling the Web, so the CSS first steps, the CSS building blocks, the styling text, and the CSS layout. And I'm now in the JavaScript section. So I have gone over the JavaScript first steps, and I'm now into the building blocks, and I'm down near the bottom of it. So next is the function return values, which is where I am right now. And as it says here, there's one more essential concept regarding functions that we have to discuss here, and that is return values. Now, it says here that some functions don't return a significant value, but others do. That is true. Technically, all functions return a value, but if there is no return statement there, the value that it returns is what is referred to as undefined. Okay? So it says it's important to understand what their values are and how to use them in your code and how to make functions return useful values. And all that will be discussed right here. So what are return values? They're something that gets returned from a function. Now, by its very nature, there can only be one thing returned from a function. But that one thing, for example, could be an array with 1,000,000 elements in it. All right. So it says you've met return values a number of times, not only in the examples like they show below, but even in the example that I gave you, the one that I wrote, I put some return values in it. So it says here with this replace function, the replace function is invoked on the myText string and is passed 2 parameters. It's right there. It's what do you want to replace and what do you want to replace it with. So as mentioned, when the function completes or finishes running, it returns a value, which is a new string with the replacement that's been made. So all cold have been changed to warm. So this should change the weather is cold to the weather is warm. And they mention here that if you look at the replace function under the Mozilla Developer Network reference page, you'll see a section called return value that'll talk about this in more depth and breadth of coverage if you're interested. All right. So again, the next paragraph down here, the second one that you see on your page, is what I'd already mentioned, and that is some functions don't return any value. In these cases, the list is a void or an undefined. All right. Generally, a return value is used where the function is an intermediate step in a calculation of some kind. So for instance, if you've got a function that calls another function, all right, like I did before with the add to and all the other ones, and we were just returning, for example, x plus y or number 1 plus number 2, etc. So using return values in your own functions, again, I'm not going to spend real much time on this because I did give you an example of this already. And as the author says, to return a value from a custom function, you need to use the return keyword. One thing you should shoot for is, when possible, have only one return statement in a function. Don't put returns all over the place. It can end up becoming very messy in your code. All right, here's the function draw. It says inside of each loop iteration, three calls are made to the random function to generate a random number. Well, this is just randomly drawing circles. All right. So if you look at this, what they're saying here is you can write it like this or you can write it like this. Well, the main advantage of writing it the first way, hopefully you see, is less code. All right, it probably will execute faster also because one line of code should execute faster than two. So as they mentioned, the first version is quicker to write and it's more compact. Now they mention here that when you execute this line of code, all right, it says when you execute the following, if 3 random calls generated, for example, 500, 235, then it would be basically doing this. These function calls are run first. One reason that they're run first is they're in parentheses. And remember, you always do what's in parens first, and then you work your way out. So you would do that one, then you would do that one, then you would do that one, and then you would work your way out to the whole thing. All right. Let's have a go writing our own function. Well, this isn't that different from what I'd shown you before. All right, so let's make a copy of this function library. Fine, we'll work with it. And I will put it in what I had been using here, which was the function start. Not a problem. All right, so we've got that. Let's add some useful functions to this script. Below the 2 existing lines of JavaScript, add the following function definitions. Well, what do we have? Squared will multiply the number by itself, cubed the number by itself, by itself, by itself, etc. And there's a factorial function. So let's grab all that, come into our code here. There's our current script that's in there. So now we're adding this. That should work. Now the factorial, if you don't know what that is, it's kind of a neat function really, because if you look here, let's see. What it will basically do is, for example, 5 factorial is the same thing as 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. All right, so when you work with something like that, that's basically what you're doing here. Now we're going to include a way to print out information about the number entered into the input. Enter the following event handler below the existing functions. So we've got an onChange event in our input. So what are we doing? We're going to take whatever we put in there, we're going to try to parse it into a float. If it's not a number, we'll say you need to enter a number. Otherwise, we're going to square the number, cube the number, and do the factorial of the number. Okay. And I should have left that blank space in here that we had. There we go. So here we are creating an onChange event handler. It runs whenever the change event fires on the text input. In other words, whenever a new value is entered into the text input box. All right. When this anonymous function runs, the value in the input is stored in the num constant. Then we do the conditional test as mentioned. If it's not a number, we just give them an error message and basically we're done there. All right. And let's see. Now, we could do other stuff here because right now all we're doing is we're saying you need to enter a number. That's it. Save the code, load it in the browser, and try it out. All right, then let's do that. It's saved. Still our function start. So let's put in here 45. Hit enter. 45 squared is 2025. 45 cubed is 91,125. 45 factorial is a really big number because it's 45 times 44 times 43 times 42 times 41, etc. So let's take something a little bit smaller than this. Let's just take 5. Now, if this works, it should say 5 squared is 25, 5 cubed is 125, and 5 factorial is 5 times 4, which is 20 times 3, which is 60 times 2, which is 120 times 1, which is still 120. So this should say 25, 125, and 120. And you can see that it does. Whoops, it does. If we put something non-numeric in there, we just get you need to enter a number. So it all appears to be working right now. Now it says at this point we'd like you to go out and write a couple of functions on your own. I've already done that. All right, so some extra function related tips. Look at another example of writing error handling into functions. It's generally a good idea to verify or check that any necessary parameters are validated. All right, and we really are not doing much of that right now. Think about the idea of creating what's referred to as a function library. With a function library, the idea behind it is you create functions that you're going to be using on a regular basis, and you put them into your own file, and then you can bring them into any program that would need to work with them. Okay? All right. So that's it. We've reached the end of the article. There's the test your skills here, which I'd strongly suggest you go over. And functions are fun, useful, and though there's a lot to talk about as far as their syntax, they're fairly understandable. Hopefully you agree with that. Notice again, I would strongly suggest that you look at this functions in depth, and we are going to be going over this callback functions sooner or later as well. So we're now through here, so the next one that's in here is the introduction to events. We'll be back with that shortly.